What is going on, everybody? Today we have NFL Mock Draft 4.0 here for the 2022 NFL Draft, which is now in under 2 weeks away. I apologize that it's been a little bit over a month since my last mock draft. I've just been super busy with content on the main channel, but I haven't really had time to pay attention to this channel, but I've still been following very closely on what's going on with the NFL and what's going on with the draft, so I do still feel like I have a good idea of where everybody's stock is at the moment. Since my last mock draft, a lot of things have changed. That was right before the Combine, so we've seen whose stocks have gone up and down since then, and obviously the NFL offseason has been nothing short of completely drunk. The draft order is completely updated with all of the trades that have happened, and boy, have there been a lot of those. So everything is up to date and good to go. This mock draft is 3 rounds with trades. Predict the pick, meaning that we're going to go through 3 rounds. There will be trades, and I am predicting what I think will happen, not necessarily what I would do if I was these teams. Probably a few days before the draft itself, I'll have a what I would do mock draft where I step into the shoes of all 32 teams and pick who I think should be the selections for all of them. So without further ado, that wraps up my intro spiel. Let's get it started. As you'll notice throughout the video here, I have a lot of bold takes and claims throughout the draft and a lot of surprising picks, but I don't think any of those shockers will fall in the top 8. I think a lot of people could see this scenario play out, and this is how I see it as of now. Aiden Hutchinson, the pass rusher out of Michigan, going number 1 to the Jaguars. He's been the heavy favorite to be the number 1 pick since the Combine. I don't think it's a lock that he goes number 1, and there has been some buzz about Trayvon Walker possibly in this range, and I also don't want to rule out an offensive lineman, even though the Jaguars appear to be pretty set there. However, I still think the pick will be Hutchinson. I think a lot of people are going to view him as the best player on the board at a position of need, and if you're the Jaguars, I don't really see much of a problem with this pick, continuing to improve a young and fairly talented pass rush who could use some work. The draft really starts at 2 here with my favorite team, the Detroit Lions, and let me tell you, I'm going to be very paranoid over the next 2 weeks because I really have no idea what's going to happen here. There are a number of names who have been tossed around for this selection. However, if we don't trade this pick, which boy I hope we do, but assuming there's no trade back, I think it will be either Trayvon Walker or Kayvon Thibodeaux. That would really be my best bet. I know there have been other names put here like Kyle Hamilton. I know Mel Kiper just had us getting Sauce Gardner. Obviously, Malik Willis has been a popular one here as well, but I don't think we're going to pick a quarterback early in this year's draft. I really think it's going to be one of the pass rushers, Walker or Thibodeaux. Of the two, I would much prefer Kayvon Thibodeaux. You'll sort of see why once we talk about him and his selection, but we're going to more so focus on Walker right here. Walker's a pretty raw player, and I don't think he's as polished as Kayvon Thibodeaux, but Walker has sky-high upside. He has rare traits. And if you're Detroit, it might be hard to pass on the upside of Trayvon Walker, although I do think Kayvon Thibodeaux's upside is very similar to Trayvon Walker, which is part of the reason why I think this pick would be a mistake, because I think Walker is a far bigger gamble than Thibodeaux, and the reward isn't really that much better. But at the end of the day, you need elite pass rushers. The Lions have not really had a true game wrecker on the defensive line since Ndamukong Suh, so I think this pick could make sense, but I don't necessarily agree with it. Pick 3 is the Houston Texans. They got to go BPA, best player available, and there are probably about 8 players you can make the argument for going here, which is why this is maybe the most fascinating pick in the top 10. I have them going with Ikem Ekwonu, the offensive tackle out of NC State. I could see this being a number of different players. However, I think Ekwonu is a fascinating talent. He's a great tackle. The Texans don't really need tackle, though, but you can slide him over to guard, where I think Ekwonu could be an all-pro player on day 1 as a rookie at either guard spot, and eventually he could always move to one of the tackle spots in the future. So I think this will be a great selection for the Texans. I think Ekwonu makes an argument as the best overall player in the draft class, and Houston's getting someone who can really be a foundational piece of their rebuild going forward. The New York Jets at 4, another team who could go in a variety of ways. They go with Ahmad Sauce Gardner, the cornerback out of Cincinnati, who's getting real top 5 buzz. And honestly, I kind of agree with it. I do genuinely believe Ahmad Gardner will be a top 5 pick, and I think all of the buzz with him really over the past month is legit and not smoke. Gardner has the ideal size and length you look for in a corner with great production, great ball skills. He tested well at the Combine. He's a very safe pick in my opinion because there's really no weaknesses to his game. I don't think he has the ceiling of a guy like Derek Stingley, but I'm very confident Ahmad Gardner could be a number 1 corner in the NFL, and I think this would be a good pick here for the Jets. Evan Neal, offensive tackle out of Alabama to the Giants. They need offensive line really bad. That kind of goes without saying. Evan Neal can plug right into right tackle, and him and Andrew Thomas can be the tackle duo of the future. Malik Willis at 6, quarterback out of Liberty to the Carolina Panthers. I do expect this pick to be a quarterback because I don't know how you can go into the season with Sam Darnold as your starter, and it's not like Baker Mayfield is some massive upgrade. I think Baker's better than Darnold, but I feel like you really got to take a swing for the fences here if you're Carolina, or at least if you're in Matt Rule's position, because your job is kind of on the line. And it really seems like Carolina wants to go for the home run. They were in on Deshaun Watson. They were in on Matthew Stafford last year. So that tells me they want to get a big fish at quarterback. They don't want to get an average starter, which is what Kenny Pickett could be. Rather, I think they're going to go for the big swing here in Malik Willis. I think this is probably the worst case scenario for Malik Willis. I think he's better off with a team who's going to be patient with his development, and Carolina's not really in a position to be patient. So for Malik Willis' sake, I really hope this doesn't happen, but I could see Carolina pulling the trigger on him. Kayvon Thibodeau, pass rusher out of Oregon to the Giants at 7. As I said, I think he should be the pick at 2 to Detroit. I think Thibodeau has pretty much similar upside to Trayvon Walker. I just think he's a significantly more polished pass rusher right away. The reason why Thibodeau has fallen is because of question marks about his motor, his effort, and his passion of football. Now, obviously, if you interview him and if you don't think he's a character fit for your locker room, I get it. But I kind of think all of this junk about him is kind of BS. I think he plays with a strong motor, and I do think he has a real passion for football. Just because he has other interests doesn't mean his first passion isn't football. So I personally think that's a bunch of baloney. I think Kayvon Thibodeau is going to be a star in the league, and I really hope he is a star just so he makes all the people who are saying he doesn't like football, I want all of them to look like idiots once Kayvon Thibodeau enters the league. So regardless of where Thibodeau gets drafted, hopefully Detroit, but wherever it ends up, I'm definitely going to be pulling for him, and I think he's going to be a superstar if he can develop. Drake London at 8 to the Atlanta Falcons. I get that their defense is a train wreck, but their wide receiving core is also a train wreck. I think Garrett Wilson is the better prospect. He's the player I would pick over Drake London. But I think Drake London's ceiling, you could argue, is a little bit higher. That might be too much for Atlanta to pass up. London and Kyle Pitts is like a Twin Towers thing. That could be pretty scary in the Atlanta offense. So not the receiver I would pick here, but I get it. Drake London probably becomes Atlanta's best receiver as soon as he signs the contract, not counting Calvin Ridley because he's never going to play a game in a Falcons jersey again, so he doesn't really count. This next range of picks is where things start to get interesting and I think a lot more controversial for people. We start with the Seattle Seahawks at 9. I have them going with Derek Stingley, the corner out of LSU. I don't think this pick has been mocked a ton because Seattle has arguably bigger needs on the offensive and defensive lines, but with the top 2 tackles off the board along with the top 3 edge rushers, I don't know if Seattle wants to do that. Charles Cross and Jermaine Johnson are both solid options here, but I think they may really like the upside of Derek Stingley, who has a higher ceiling than any cornerback, maybe any defensive player in general in this entire draft class. 2019, Derek Stingley is a true freshman, was one of the most dominant defensive players in the country, has had trouble staying on the field and hasn't really replicated that these past 2 seasons, but I think Seattle's going to have a hard time passing on somebody with the upside of Derek Stingley. The Jets at 10 go Garrett Wilson, wide receiver out of Ohio State. I think Garrett Wilson's the best receiver in the draft, and I have no problem with this pick for the Jets. I think him and Sauce Gardner would be a really good use of their first-round picks. We have our first trade of the day here at 11. Trent McDuffie just screams New England Patriot to me, and the Patriots are going to scoop him up here, moving up 10 spots with the Washington Commanders. Washington will get pick 21, pick 53 in the second round, and a future 4th. New England will get pick 11 and pick 113. I think that's fair value here. There weren't really any clear picks for Washington to make here, which is why I was so inclined to move down. New England gets Trent McDuffie, who's going to plug right in at corner, which is a huge need for them. And as I said, I think McDuffie is the prototypical Bill Belichick type of player, so I think that's a pick New England is really going to like. Minnesota here at 12 is in a really interesting position. Obviously, corners are a pretty big need for them, but the top 3 guys are all off the board. So I have them going with Kyle Hamilton out of Notre Dame. I haven't seen this pick mocked a lot, but I think it could make sense. The Vikings went for an outside-the-box GM hire with Kwethi Adolfo-Mensah from Cleveland. I hope I pronounced his name right. So I think the Vikings could surprise some people with the logic of their picks, but I don't think it's necessarily a bad logic here. And with Hamilton, best player available. His stock has slipped a little bit over the past couple of months. He had a disappointing combine, and it doesn't look like he will be a top 5 pick, which there was conversation of that in the past. The Vikings, I think, need safety more than people realize. Harrison Smith not getting any younger, and they could use somebody next to Harrison Smith. I think the two of them could be a really nice duo until Harrison Smith eventually retires or leaves, which is likely going to be sooner rather than later. So I don't have a problem with this pick for Minnesota. Sometimes you just got to go for value, and that's what Kyle Hamilton here is at 12. I have the Texans at 13 going with Jameson Williams, wide receiver from Alabama. Another pick that I haven't really seen mocked a whole lot, but the Texans could use wide receiver pretty badly. And Houston realizes they're not going to be all that good next year, so they don't need their rookies to necessarily be stars right out the gate. While I think Jameson Williams could be a star if he's on the field, that's the question because he's coming off the ACL injury. Apparently his rehab is way ahead of schedule, which is great news. But I think Houston realizes that they're in it for the long game. They don't need somebody who's going to make a huge impact year one, rather somebody who can develop and be great here for a while, and I think that's what Jameson Williams can be. The value here at 13 I think is perfectly fine. I think Jameson Williams is right there with Garrett Wilson for wide receiver 1 for me personally. So I think Akem Aquanu at 3 and Jameson Williams at 13. This would be a really nice first round for the Houston Texans. Devontae Wyatt, defensive lineman out of Georgia at 14. We actually have the 2 defensive tackles going right next to each other with Jordan Davis as pick 15. Starting with Wyatt here, he's a little bit older at 24, but he's a freak athlete. His stock has really gone up these past couple of months. I think the Ravens could look to add to their defensive line. They did bring back Calais Campbell, but he's kind of on his last legs. And I think Devontae Wyatt here would be a nice fit. His partner in crime, Jordan Davis, goes to the Eagles. I think Jordan Davis screams Howie Roseman. I think this pick would really make a lot of sense. I know defensive line really isn't that big of a need for the Eagles. They have Fletcher Cox, they have Javon Hargrave, but Cox as well, not getting any younger, probably on his last legs. And imagine a defensive line. You got Fletcher Cox, you got Javon Hargrave, and then in the middle of those two, sandwiched between them, you have Jordan Davis, the freak. So that's a little bit scary for opposing offenses. Again, not the biggest need, but this pick screams Howie. Charles Croft, offensive tackle out of Mississippi State to the Saints. There have been some top 10 buzz about him. I've had him mocked in the top 10 before, and I honestly think he probably should go that high. I think he's that good. But here I have him falling to 16. The Saints need a left tackle pretty badly. Boom, plug and play. Pretty simple. The question with Cross is sort of what he does outside of an air raid offense, because at Mississippi State under Mike Leach, they really threw the ball a whole lot, and they were a one-dimensional offense. These concerns were similar to Andre Dillard coming out of Washington State a few years back. Although Dillard's not necessarily a horrible player, he also hasn't lived up to being a first-round pick. So that's sort of the criticism with Cross, and I get that. But I think he's a really good player. I think he's a better prospect than Dillard, so nice pick here for New Orleans. I wasn't lying when I said I had some bold picks here, and one of the most, I would say, controversial most likely is Desmond Ridder here at 17 to the Tennessee Titans. The Titans are going to move up 9 spots with the LA Chargers. The Chargers get pick 90, pick 143, and the Titans' third-round pick next year, along with 26, obviously. Tennessee will get pick 17, 123, and 195. So the Titans are a team who likes to take risks. They've done that in the first round time and time again. Sometimes it's paid off, like Jeffrey Simmons. Sometimes it has completely backfired, like, say, Isaiah Wilson. So the Titans are in an interesting spot because they're a really good football team. They've been good for quite a while. Their Super Bowl window is wide open. But this year showed us that Ryan Tannehill is not a Super Bowl winning quarterback. And I understand they extended him to big money fairly recently. But I think the Titans realize if they want to win a Super Bowl, which they have a really good window to do so now, they're probably not going to do that with Ryan Tannehill. So I think the Titans are a team who is going to highly consider the idea of going and getting a quarterback, Desmond Ridder has received really consistent first-round buzz over the past couple of weeks because throughout draft season, it's been unclear, is he a first-rounder, is he not a first-rounder? I saw a report that it's pretty much a consensus around the league that he is a first-round quarterback, and I could certainly see that. Ridder certainly comes with his flaws, but he also has the athletic upside to be pretty solid. He can sit behind Tannehill for a year and develop, so I think this pick could make sense here for the Titans. I thought about having Tennessee move up to 5 to get Malik Willis, but the jump from 26 to 5 is just a little bit too extreme. So I had them getting Ridder here at 17. I think this really could happen. I think it makes a lot of sense. So at 18, we have another trade. Jermaine Johnson has been slipping down the board. I think it's a lot likely that Johnson's not going to be here. But this is just sort of how the board played out. And Jermaine Johnson just gets unlucky. If he goes into top 15, maybe into the top 10, I wouldn't really be surprised by that. But he just happened to fall here to 18, where the Green Bay Packers are going to come up and get him. The Packers will trade 22 and 59 to the Eagles, and they will trade away 18, 83, and 237. So pretty much the Eagles are moving down 4 spots, swapping a 3 into a 2. So Jermaine Johnson here going to the Green Bay Packers. They need to add some pass rushing with Zadarius Smith out the door. Green Bay is a pretty good front as is, but Jermaine Johnson here at 18 is very solid value. A lot of people think he's a top 10 player in this draft class. So I think this will be a solid move here for Green Bay. And for the Eagles, you move down, you add a second-round pick, and spoiler alert, they're picking the guy at 22 who I would have had them pick at 18. New Orleans at 19. This is an interesting spot. They need wide receiver very, very badly. I was down to Chris Olave and Christian Watson. I think some people might think Olave makes a lot more sense. He's the significantly more polished player. New Orleans needs somebody who can start there because I think the Saints, with getting 2 first-round picks, at first when they made that trade, I thought there was something more with it. I thought they were maybe going to use that as ammo to get a quarterback, maybe move up for Malik Willis. But everything I've read, the Saints believe that they can win this year, and that's why they added another first-round pick. So you'd think maybe they go for a more ready player like Chris Olave, but the upside with Christian Watson might be too much to pass up. I think this is probably the highest I've seen Watson go, but I really could see this. It's hard to find a receiver with Watson's size and athleticism. Now, he has his weaknesses, small route tree, questionable hands, but I think New Orleans is a team who likes to take risks, and Christian Watson, although he's a big risk, the reward is certainly very high. The Steelers at 20 go Kenny Pickett, quarterback out of Pittsburgh. When they originally signed Mitchell Trubisky, I thought that pretty much crossed him off the list of picking a quarterback, but it seems like it's been a very popular pick to have the Steelers still go with a quarterback here, and I think there's a very strong chance they don't do that. But it's not like they signed Trubisky to super big money. So if they do really like Kenny Pickett, the hometown guy, played his college ball at Pitt, it could happen. And I think this is a scenario that could make sense. The Washington Commanders at 21, they got this pick from New England. Select Zion Johnson, guard from Boston College. They've been heavily linked to Chris Olave, so this is another possible Olave landing spot. But instead, it will be Washington going with Zion Johnson, who I think is a really good player. I think Washington fans might not love it, but I think he's an outstanding prospect. They'll plug right into guard, where obviously they lost Brandon Scherf. I think that'd be a great move for Washington. Moving down 10 picks, you had a second-round pick, and you got a great player here in Zion Johnson. So the Eagles at 22, as I said earlier, they're getting the player they would have picked at 18. It's Chris Olave. I thought about Olave at 19 and 21, so the Eagles get kind of lucky that the guy they would have picked there stays here. I have been on the train that the Eagles are not going to pick a receiver in the first round, largely because I expected the Eagles to sign a veteran. They didn't. I'm sorry, Zach Pascal, you're not like a proven starter or anything, so he doesn't really count. Olave's been heavily linked to the Eagles as well, and I think Philadelphia would rather go for a safe pick at wide receiver rather than go for the home run. So you got Olave and Devontae Smith as the 1-2 duo going forward. That'd be pretty nice, not going to lie. Kenyon Green, guard at Texas A&M to the Arizona Cardinals. I think they could use some help on the interior of the offensive line, and I think Kenyon Green will be a solid pick. Not much more to say there. Boye Mafe, edge rusher out of Minnesota to the Cowboys. I think Kenyon Green would have been perfect for Dallas, but he goes one pick before them. So they'll settle for Boye Mafe, who's really risen up as of recent, had a great Senior Bowl, has a lot of upside, but he is 24 years old. I don't think Boye Mafe is a first-round prospect for me. I feel like it's just a little bit risky to pick someone who's raw and is still a gamble, but is also already pretty much 24 years old. So I'm not a huge Boye Mafe guy, but it does seem like he will go in the first round, and Dallas could use some more help on the defensive line. They currently have Dante Fowler penciled in as a starter, according to our lads. So that's not ideal. You can do better than that. The Buffalo Bills at 25 select Andrew Booth Jr., cornerback out of Clemson. There was a point in time that I thought Andrew Booth would not be a first-round pick. I thought the media was higher on him than the league. But with Andrew Booth really being consistently mocked high in mock drafts, I've kind of changed my mind about it, and I do think Andrew Booth will be a first-round pick now. The Bills need corner pretty bad, and Booth is one of the best playmakers in the secondary in this year's draft class, so I do think he could be a pretty solid pick and start right away alongside Tre'Davious White. The Chargers might be one of the bigger winners of this first round. You moved down 9 spots, you had 2 third-round picks, and you still picked Trevor Penning, who was highly considered at 17. Trevor Penning's stock seems to be all over the place. I've seen him in the top 10 before. I don't think that's going to happen. I think Penning goes a little bit later than expected, probably not much later than this. So I think the Chargers walk out of this first round with a big grin on their face because this will be a great scenario for them. Bucks at 27 go Kaiir Elam out of Florida, the corner. Another not so popular pick, I would imagine, from Bucks fans because they really don't need a corner. But they've got some guys who are going to be free agents soon. Sean Murphy-Bunting and Jamel Dean are both on the last year of their contracts. They did re-sign Carlton Davis, and although that's a great trio, I don't see a world where Sean Murphy-Bunting and Jamel Dean are back. Added on to the fact that the Bucks cornerback room was pretty banged up last year, Elam's a raw player who needs some development anyway, so he can be corner number 4 behind those 3. He can play in case of injury, which is certainly very possible, and then be a starter in 2023. So I think keeping the Florida kid in the state of Florida could make sense, and I actually really could see the possibility of this pick. George Pickens to the Packers at 28. This is one of my favorite fits here in this mock draft, and I will say this. For those who don't know, I strongly dislike the Packers, and I strongly like George Pickens. He's one of my favorite players in the draft class. I currently have him as my wide receiver 3, behind Garrett Wilson and Jamison Williams. So yes, I'm very high on George Pickens. I have him over Drake London, Chris Olave, Treylon Burks. I think George Pickens is a stud. But one thing I don't like about him is that he is a perfect fit for what the Green Bay Packers look for in a receiver, big guys who can block. George Pickens is big, he can block, but unlike a lot of those big blocking receivers who the Packers have gotten in recent years, George Pickens is really, really good. So I think he's arguably their best receiver right away as he steps on the field. Obviously coming back from the ACL injury, he played a little bit down the stretch last year. I think Pickens is an extraordinarily talented player. I think Pickens and Jermaine Johnson for Green Bay in the first round would be a home run. Kansas City Chiefs with back-to-back picks here at 29 and 30. I have them going with Arnold Ebiketie and Treylon Burks. Ebiketie is a very talented pass rusher, going to be one of the more pro-ready guys, I think, which the Chiefs want guys who are going to contribute right away, and I think Ebiketie will do that. As for Treylon Burks, this is a lot later than a lot of people are expecting. I think Burks is not going to go in the top half of the first round. I think this is more so around his range. I think the Chiefs are going to want a unique type of playmaker, which is what Burks is, to join what is already a decent receiving core with Juju Smith-Schuster, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, and Mecole Hardman. I think Burks is a very different player to those guys, and I think the Chiefs are going to have a lot of fun using him. Tyler Linderbaum, center out of Iowa, to the Bengals here at 31. The Bengals have really revamped their offensive line in the offseason, which was a major necessity for them, and thank goodness they did for the savior of Joe Burrow. However, center is still a position of question, in my opinion, for the Bengals. They signed Ted Karras in the offseason, who's fine, but I think you can do better than that, and Tyler Linderbaum is better than that. Lions at 32, I thought about a trade back here just because there are so many good fits here on the defensive side of the ball here for Detroit, but I'm stuck at 32, and we're going to have them pick Devin Lloyd. I think this will be a phenomenal selection here for the Lions. I would be very happy about this pick because I think Lloyd is one of the top 10 to 15 players in this draft class. It seems like his stock has slipped a little bit as of recent, but I still think he's one of the best football players in this draft class. It's a very deep linebacking core throughout this draft. A lot of guys who are going to be good day 2 picks, which is why I think Devin Lloyd and Nakobe Dean slip a little bit as a result. But hey, I'm not complaining because the Lions get an absolute stud here with Devin Lloyd. The Jacksonville Jaguars select Daxton Hill, the versatile defensive back out of Michigan, here to open up the second round. I listed him as a safety, but he can also play slot corner as well. I think Daxton Hill is a fantastic player, probably going to end up in the top 20 on my big board. I think he's really, really good. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he ends up going in the first round, but again, this is just sort of how the board played out. Safety is another position that's like super deep throughout the middle of this draft, which is why guys like Hill are going to slip a little bit. Lions at 34 go Jalen Petre, another versatile defensive back. He's coming from Baylor. Petre is one of my favorite players in this draft class. He's a really fun player, and I think he'd be a good fit in the Lions secondary. We did sign Deshaun Elliott the other day, but that was only on a one-year deal. Petre can play corner, he can play safety, so I think he'd be a good fit, and I think Aubrey Pleasant and Aaron Glenn would have a lot of fun with Petre, and this is another pick that I would be quite happy with. I think Jalen Petre could be a surprise first-rounder for some, although if he goes in the first round, that wouldn't really be a surprise to me. The Jets go with a Georgia linebacker here at 35. Maybe not the Georgia linebacker you'd expect, though. It's going to be Quay Walker. Quay Walker is a big guy, 6'4", 240 pounds. He's a lot bigger than Nakobe Dean, and I think there are some people who may think that Walker's a better pro prospect than Nakobe Dean. Dean doesn't have to wait too much longer. He goes at 36 to the other New York team, the New York Giants, who I think could use some high-character leaders on their defense. I think that's what Nakobe Dean is. So, as you can see here, the Georgia defense continuing to go off the board. I think that's now 5 Georgia defenders here who have been selected, and Lewis Cine won't be too far behind these guys. George Karlaftis, edge rusher out of Purdue to the Texans. Another great pick there for Houston. I think Karlaftis goes later than people expect. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the first round, though. Again, this is just sort of how the board played out. David Ojabo to the Jets. It's very unfortunate he tore his Achilles, but similar to the Jameson Williams thing, I think he's going to go to a team who's really looking at the bigger picture and not needing someone who's going to contribute right away. The Jets are also not a great team, so I think they're going to be patient here with Ojabo, who I think is less likely to play this season than Jameson Williams because Achilles injuries I think take longer to recover from than ACLs, and Ajabo's happened 2.5 months after Jameson Williams did. I think this will be a really good pick here for the Jets here, adding a very talented edge rusher with plenty of upside here. Probably a steal here in the second round. Sky Moore, wide receiver out of Western Michigan to the Bears. They need wide receiver really bad. I think Sky Moore is one of the more underrated players in this draft class. He's sort of flown under the radar, but I think he's really, really good, and he would instantly be Chicago's wide receiver too. Bernard Raymond, tackle out of Central Michigan to Seattle at 40. Very similar to the whole Boye Mafe thing. Bernard Raymond is somebody who sort of burst onto the scene at the Senior Bowl. He's super athletic, but he's super raw. But again, he's old. He's even older than Boye Mafe. Raymond, I believe, is going to be 25 when he makes his NFL debut. I think ideally you could look for a career trajectory like Garrett Bowles. Bowles was also 25 when he made his debut, kind of a raw player who eventually did develop into a solid starter for the Denver Broncos. So if you're getting Garrett Bowles here, then I think Seattle would be quite happy. But I don't think it's any guarantee you're getting Garrett Bowles. So that's why I'm not really a huge Bernard Raymond guy either. The Seattle Seahawks here at 41. I have them going with quarterback Matt Corral out of Ole Miss. The quarterback stocks in this draft class are very in question to me. Outside of Malik Willis, who I'm very confident is going to be a top 10 pick, I'm not convinced anybody else is going to be a first rounder. Desmond Ridder, Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral, Sam Howell. I could see those 4 guys really going in any order. But I think Seattle's really going to like the physical upside that Matt Corral brings to the table. Not the most consistent, but he has arguably the second highest ceiling of any quarterback in this draft class. Jahan Dotson, wide receiver out of Penn State to the Indianapolis Colts. I really like Paris Campbell, but he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. So this is your sort of unique do-it-all playmaker here, although Jahan Dotson is a better pro prospect than Paris Campbell was. But I think the Colts can use Dotson in the way that they had sort of hoped Paris Campbell would develop. I could see Dotson going higher, maybe in the first round, but I think this is certainly good value here for Indianapolis, adding a good playmaker here for Matt Ryan. Sam Howell, quarterback out of North Carolina to the Atlanta Falcons. They signed Marcus Mariota. I think he's a fine stopgap quarterback for a year or two, but I think Sam Howell would be a solid pick here. For me, Howell is QB2 at the moment behind Malik Willis, so I would probably support this pick for Atlanta. At 44, we have another trade, the Philadelphia Eagles, with their second move of the day. This time, they are moving up to acquire Lewis Cine, the safety from Georgia. The Cleveland Browns are moving down 7 spots from 44 to 51 and adding pick 101 in the third. So Cleveland moves down 7 spots. They add another third-round pick, which is pretty good value here for Cleveland. The player they picked at 51 is probably the guy I would have given them at 44 right here. As for the Eagles, this is really good value. I don't think Lewis Cine probably does fall this far, but if he does, make your move, Philly. Scoop him up. I think this will be a good pickup for them. Drake Jackson, edge rusher out of USC to the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens like their raw edge rushers because they can develop them better than anybody. Drake London's raw, but he has the athletic upside to be really good. So I think Baltimore would be a perfect fit for him. Tariq Woolen, cornerback at a UTSA to the Vikings. Woolen is a big corner. He's about 6'3". He has outstanding size, outstanding length. I believe he ran like a 4.3. So this is a tradesy player who is certainly a swing for the fences. The floor is low, but the ceiling is sky high. And again, I think Minnesota could go off the rails with some picks. Alec Pierce, wide receiver out of Cincinnati to the Washington Commanders. Another high athlete, high upside type of player. This kid can jump out of the gym. He's huge. He can run fast. And I think Washington could use somebody who can really stretch the field. Kyler Gordon, cornerback out of Washington to the Bears. There was a point in time where it seemed like Gordon was going to be a first rounder, but that hype has sort of died down. He's going to go here in the middle of the second to a Bears team who needs somebody else to start alongside Jalen Johnson pretty badly. Now as we move into the second half of round 2, starting with the Saints at 49, they get Jaquan Brisker, the safety out of Penn State. Again, the safety board kind of played out where I think all the safeties end up here a little bit later than they probably will end up going in the real draft when it's all said and done. But Brisker has fantastic athleticism with sky-high upside. The Saints did sign Marcus May to replace Marcus Williams, and May and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson are a fine duo, but Chauncey Gardner-Johnson can play all around the field, so I think the Saints can make it work with those three safeties. And again, Marcus May is probably not a long-term option. Added on to the fact that Gardner-Johnson's on the last year of his contract, and the Saints are obviously not really rolling in cap space. We have a trade here at 50. Normally you see two rivals not really making a deal like this. Not necessarily that these two teams are like geographic rivals, but they're both at the top of the AFC. They've both been there for multiple years now. They're probably going to stay at the top of the AFC for quite a while, that being the Bills and the Chiefs. Buffalo moves up 7 spots from 57 to 50. They give Kansas City pick 89 in the third round in the process. Buffalo here goes with Breece Hall, running back out of Iowa State. I think Hall probably should go earlier than this, but there just aren't a ton of running back needy teams throughout the NFL because everybody has good running backs. But I think Breece Hall is going to be a stud, and the Bills, they are missing a top-flight running back. If they can add that to their offense, look out. I don't know how the Chiefs feel about helping Buffalo in this scenario, but they add a third-round pick along with their second, so they probably don't get too mad. Cleveland at 51 goes with Travis Jones, the defensive tackle out of UConn. He's a big, space-eating nose tackle with a great Senior Bowl. Could be another guy who's a first-round sleeper, but he's going to go here in the second round. I think Cleveland would be very happy with this pick. Tyler Smith, tackle out of Tulsa to the Steelers. Another guy who's gotten first-round buzz over the recent months, but I don't think he will end up as a first-round pick. The Steelers have got to tickle pink here because they do need offensive tackle really bad for their new quarterback, whether that'll be Kenny Pickett next year or Mitch Trubisky, certainly Pickett for the long term. But adding Tyler Smith here in the second round I think would be good value. Greg Dulcich, tight end out of UCLA to Green Bay, first tight end off the board. Dulcich sort of came out of nowhere and really played well at the Combine, and I feel like everybody has sort of hopped on the Greg Dulcich train since then. It does seem like he will probably be the first tight end off the board as of now. Leo Chenal, linebacker, Wisconsin, to the Washington Commanders. I think this would make sense for them. They did draft Jamin Davis last year in the first round, but I think they could look to add somebody else there, and I think 54 here for Chenal would be solid value. Kenneth Walker III, running back, Michigan State to the Cardinals. They did lose Chase Edmonds, so I think they could use somebody who has a lot of juice and explosiveness to pair up with James Conner. I think Walker would be a better fit here than, say, like a Breece Hall. So I think Hall going to the Bills and Walker to the Cardinals would probably be best for all parties. Troy Anderson, linebacker out of Montana State to the Dallas Cowboys. Anderson tore up the Combine. I think Dallas could certainly look to add some linebacking help. They did bring back Leighton Vander Esch, but that's probably not a long-term deal. So Troy Anderson can be the eventual replacement. The Kansas City Chiefs back on the board here at 57. They go with Zion McCollum, the cornerback from Sam Houston State. This is a very similar pick to Tariq Woolen, the corner of the Vikings, who just got picked a little bit earlier. McCollum is a raw player, obviously coming from a small school, but he's big, 6'2", maybe 6'3", with also unbelievable measurables and unbelievable athleticism. Sometimes with corners, you just have to bet on guys who have traits and hope they develop. And I think McCollum here to the Chiefs could certainly end up being a really good investment in the long haul. Dylan Parham, guard out of Memphis to the Falcons. They got this pick last year in the Julio Jones trade. They need a guard pretty badly. Here's your guard. Boom, let's move on. Martin Emerson, corner out of Mississippi State to the Eagles here at 59. They need corner pretty bad. They didn't really address that in free agency, and they haven't addressed it here yet in the draft. Wouldn't be surprised if they go corner early, but with Jordan Davis and Olave and then moving up for Louis Seen, it was kind of hard to do that. But they did get this extra pick in the Chris Olave trade down, so there you go. Somebody who could become a starting corner in short time. Cam Jurgens, the center out of Nebraska to the Bucks. I list him here as an offensive lineman, however, an interior offensive lineman, because he would probably play guard in Tampa Bay. They re-signed Ryan Jensen, so they don't really need a center, but I think Jurgens could slide over to guard. A very under-the-radar name who not a lot of people are talking about, but I think he's going to go a lot higher than people expect. Okay, Niners fans, hear me out here. I don't think they're really going to like this one a whole lot. It's James Cook, running back out of Georgia. I think Cook is the third best running back in this draft class. So, value-wise, I don't have a problem with it. He's the prototypical Niner-type back. He's small, but he's fast, he's quick, he's a great receiver. The Trey Sermon pick didn't really work out last year, but the Elijah Mitchell selection did. However, San Francisco in recent years has liked to have a running back by committee. They like to have multiple good backs. So I think a duo of James Cook and Elijah Mitchell could honestly make a lot of sense. So, I don't think Niners fans would love this pick, but I think the fit is really good. Logan Hall out of Houston. He's an edge interior defensive lineman hybrid. Probably can play a little bit of both out of Houston. Going to the Chiefs. He's probably going to go higher than this. Another guy who I think could be like a sleeper first-round pick, but I have him going here at 62. Great value here for the Kansas City Chiefs. I think they would run this card up to the podium. Chad Muma, linebacker out of Wyoming to the Bengals. Again, this is where the linebackers are really going to start to fall. Muma here being the next on the list, followed by Channing Tindall out of Georgia. The third Georgia linebacker here to go in the second round. Tindall doesn't necessarily have the same production that like Nakobe Dean or Quay Walker have, but Tindall has a ton of athleticism and a lot of upside, and I think the Broncos could be interested in that. Now on to the third round. We start with pick 65. The Jacksonville Jaguars select Josh Paschal, the edge rusher out of Kentucky. The last time they picked an edge rusher out of Kentucky named Josh, it worked out pretty well. Calvin Austin, wide receiver out of Memphis to the Lions. Here's your wide receiver, Detroit. Personally, I would rather us get a bigger body target who has the upside of being a wide receiver one, like, say, a George Pickens late in the first round. Calvin Austin is certainly not a big target. He's about 5'7", 5'8", but he has unbelievable explosiveness and quickness with the ball in his hands, and I think having him as like a gadget playmaker could be pretty fun. He also has the ability to play on the outside, despite his lack of size and length, which is good because Amon-Ra St. Brown is more of your prototypical slot receiver. So I think this pick could make sense. And again, the last time the Lions picked a receiver with the name Calvin, it worked out pretty well. Cole Strange, offensive guard out of Chattanooga to the Giants. They still need offensive line very badly. They drafted Evan Neal earlier. Here's another one. Cam Taylor-Britt, cornerback out of Nebraska to the Texans. I think he's very underrated. Certainly a sleeper name. He had a good Senior Bowl. Very talented player here. And the Texans need outside corner really, really bad. Jamari Sawyer here at pick 69. Nice. Versatile offensive lineman to the Jets who could look to add on the offensive line. They haven't drafted any O-linemen yet, so here's your offensive lineman. Christian Harris, linebacker, Alabama to the Jaguars. I thought at a point in time Harris could possibly be a first-round pick. Now I don't really see it. But here at pick 70, pretty solid value. Cam Thomas, edge rusher out of San Diego State to the Chicago Bears, adding some young pieces to the pass rush. Obviously, they lost Khalil Mack. And then Sam Williams, edge rusher out of Ole Miss to the Seahawks. Another Ole Miss player going to Seattle. Williams tested very well at the combine. Great quickness, great speed. And Seattle likes raw but athletic edge rushers, and I think Sam Williams could be a nice fit. The Colts at pick 73 go Roger McCreary, cornerback out of Auburn. McCreary is more of a nickel guy, and I think at first glance you'd think, why would the Colts pick him? Because they have Kenny Moore, who's one of the best nickels in the NFL. And while that's true, maybe they look to develop McCreary on the outside. McCreary here is better value than any of the corners on the board, so even if he isn't the perfect fit, the value here would be really good. And Kenny Moore also isn't overly young, so eventually he may get worse. McCreary can step in as the replacement. Perion Winfrey, defensive tackle out of Oklahoma to Atlanta. I could see him going earlier than this. Senior Bowl MVP, was very good really that entire week. Atlanta needs defensive line really bad, and they've sort of neglected that here in this mock draft, but now they're going to go and get their guy. Daniel Falele, tackle out of Minnesota to the Broncos. Because he's so raw but has a ton of upside, I have no idea where his ceiling lies, but I think here at 75 is good value, especially the guy like Bernard Raymond is going to go at 40, because Even though Falele may be a little bit worse than Raymond right off the bat, although both are very raw, Falele also hasn't beat in age, as he's only about 22 and a half currently, so 2 years younger than Raymond. So I think there's more reason to be optimistic about Falele's development. Denver doesn't really need a starting tackle now, but Falele is not going to be someone who starts right away. But he can develop. He's a complete mammoth of a human being, nearly 400 pounds, absolutely huge. Kyle Phillips, wide receiver, UCLA, to the Ravens. He's a really high-floor player who I think is going to be a good pro. And the Ravens need like some reliable, steady players at wide receiver because they've really lacked that in recent years. I think Rashad Bateman's going to be really, really good. But other than that, there isn't really a whole lot of certainty at that position on Baltimore. Marquise Brown, although talented, hasn't been reliable, and he is on the last year of his contract. I'm not really so sure how much the Ravens want to pay him. Even if they do, they could use a number 3 with Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman, and I think that can be Kyle Phillips. Marquise Haynes, guard out of Oklahoma to the Vikings. They need interior offensive line pretty bad, so maybe they can develop Haynes to eventually become a starter. Khalil Shakir, wide receiver, Boise State to the Browns. He's a playmaker with the ball in his hands. Cleveland needs wide receiver very badly. Odell Beckham's out the door. Jarvis Landry's out the door. They did add Amari Cooper, but I think they could look to add more. Wan'Dale Robinson, wide receiver out of Kentucky to the Chargers. Everybody wants their own version of Deebo Samuel, which I think is probably not the greatest logic in the world because there's only one Deebo Samuel out there. But Wan'Dale Robinson does that type of skill set, as in he's like a gadget player who can be used in a variety of different ways. The Chargers don't need an outside receiver. You have Mike Williams, you have Keenan Allen who can play on the outside and the inside. But I think Wan'Dale Robinson really can open up a new explosive element of the offense, and I think that could make sense. Here at pick 80, the Bengals are going to move up here. Cincinnati's not a team who historically makes a lot of draft day deals, but I have them trading away pick 95 and 136 to the Texans for pick 80 and 245. With this pick, I had the Bengals going Trey McBride, tight end out of Colorado State. They lost CJ Uzomah. They did sign Hayden Hurst, though, but I think they could look for someone who can be the long-term tight end. This tight end class is really interesting because you don't really have a clear tight end 1, and then you have like 5 or 6 guys who are all lumped together. Dulcich, who was picked earlier by Green Bay, McBride, Jelani Woods, Charlie Kohler, Jeremy Ruckert, maybe Isaiah Likely's in that discussion. I think all the tight ends could go in a similar range, and I really don't know where that range is. I think once 1 or 2 of them start to go off the board, maybe the rest will eventually follow because I think they all have similar current projections. But I think Trey McBride is better than most of them. I think he might be the best, most pro-ready tight end in the draft class. I think he's going to be very good right off the bat. And I think adding high-floor, productive players to the Bengals, who are maybe just a few missing pieces away, I think that would be a really good pick for them. Carson Strong going to the Giants at 81 is an idea that I really like. Let me explain. So the Giants hired Joe Shane and Brian Daboll to be their head coach and GM from the Bills. And there are some athletic similarities between Carson Strong and Josh Allen. Strong has a cannon for an arm, like Josh Allen. Strong is also a big body, 6'3", 226. He doesn't necessarily have the height that Josh Allen has, but Strong is a thickly, compactly built kid. Now, he has nowhere near the mobility that Josh Allen has. Allen's one of the better mobile quarterbacks in the league. Carson Strong does not have that at all. Strong doesn't have the poise in the pocket that Josh Allen does either. So, no, Carson Strong's probably not going to be the next Josh Allen, but he is a talented big-arm quarterback who maybe this regime can look to develop. Daniel Jones probably isn't the guy going forward, so maybe it's worth a flyer here in the 3rd round on Carson Strong. Pierre Strong Jr., running back out of South Dakota State to the Atlanta Falcons. They have Cordero Patterson, who is sort of your do-it-all, gadgety, just do whatever with type of player because he's like pretty much their chess piece on their offense. They have Mike Davis, who's more of your short yardage power back. I think they could look for that home run hitting speed back, and that's exactly what Pierre Strong is. It seems like Strong's stock has really gone up in recent weeks, and I think he could be a sleeper day 2 candidate. David Bell, wide receiver, Purdue to the Packers. Bell did not test well at all in the combine, but I think he's a high-floor player who is a really, really solid football player. He's good with the ball in his hands, even if he doesn't have the quickness you really look for. But I think this would be a Green Bay type of pick. They like to pick receivers who may not be the best athletes, but could be a very solid pro. Green Bay is certainly giving Aaron Rodgers some weapons here with David Bell, Greg Dulcich, and George Pickens. Kobe Bryant, cornerback out of Cincinnati to the Steelers. Kobe Bryant won the Jim Thorpe Award as best defensive back in college football this season, which is certainly interesting because he had Sauce Gardner on the other side of him. Sauce Gardner is certainly the better pro prospect, but Kobe Bryant is very good in his own right. I think corner is a bigger need for the Steelers than people realize, so I think that pick could make sense. Bo Melton to New England here at 85 is one of my favorite picks in the draft. Bo Melton just screams New England Patriot to me. He seems like the type of guy who I really think they would enjoy using. He's a very versatile playmaker, not the biggest guy, but you can do a lot of different things with him. And again, everybody's trying to draft their own version of Deebo Samuel. We're seeing it with guys like Wan'Dale Robinson and Calvin Austin, and now here with Bo Melton, I think it could be pretty similar. I think Melton could also just be a really well-rounded slot receiver. You know, New England loves their slot guys, so I think that pick could make a lot of sense. The Las Vegas Raiders, their first pick of the day after trading their first and second rounders to Green Bay for Devontae Adams. They go with Brandon Smith, linebacker out of Penn State. I think the Raiders probably look to go BPA early. They could use linebacker, and I think Brandon Smith is solid value. DeMarvin Leal, edge rusher or interior defensive lineman, depending on where you classify him, out of Texas A&M to the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals sometimes like to go for big swings for the fence, and I think DeMarvin Leal could certainly be that. Super athletic, was once a top 5 to 10 pick, but it just hasn't really worked out. He goes here late in the third to Arizona. Tyquan Thornton, wide receiver out of Baylor to the Cowboys. Leave it to Jerry Jones here to pick the flashy, speedy, offensive playmaker. Dallas lost Amari Cooper in the offseason. They also lost Cedric Wilson, who is a better player than people realize. So they need some help at wide receiver. You have CeeDee Lamb and Michael Gallup, who are a great duo, but now you add a new element of speed to the receiving core of Tyquan Thornton, who is a Texas kid, played his college ball at Baylor. So I don't think that's a bad pick for Dallas. I think Thornton could be very solid here late in the third round. The Kansas City Chiefs here at 89 got this pick from Buffalo earlier in the day. Go with Brian Robinson Jr., the running back out of Alabama. They do have Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They did sign Ronald Jones. But Brian Robinson is certainly a very good short yardage back. He's also good in the pass game. Edwards-Helaire and Ronald Jones, not so much in either of those categories. So I think Brian Robinson would be a good fit in that backfield, and I actually really like that pick for them. Marcus Jones, corner out of Houston to the Chargers. He's probably never going to be a prototypical outside corner. He's not the biggest guy, only around 5'8", but he's an explosive, dynamic player, interception machine. He also did a lot of kick and punt returns for Houston. He was one of the best return men in the country. So the Chargers can figure out how to use him. He's not necessarily a prototypical corner, but he's a good football player when it's all said and done. Lacita Smith, guard out of Virginia Tech to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They drafted Cam Jurgens earlier, but it doesn't hurt to add more at guard. They did acquire Shaq Mason from New England, but I guess the hope here is one of Smith or Jurgens ends up working out. Abraham Lucas, tackle out of Washington State to the Packers. They could look to add some depth on the offensive line. Green Bay has had a really good draft class here. Hopefully it does not end up this well for Green Bay because, as I said earlier, I strongly dislike Green Bay. We got a couple Oregon defensive backs going back-to-back with Michael Wright, the corner, to San Francisco, and Verone McKinley III, the safety to Kansas City Chiefs. Wright is a very talented player. The Niners drafted an Oregon corner last year in Demidor Lenoir, who had an underrated rookie year. They also have Ambry Thomas, who they picked late, who also was pretty good last year, but it doesn't hurt to add more here in the secondary. And then Verone McKinley, one of my favorite players at Oregon. I'm a Duck fan for context, and Verone McKinley is a playmaker, flies all around the field. The Chiefs did lose Tyrann Mathieu. They also signed Justin Reed, but it doesn't hurt to add some more depth there at safety. Dameon Pierce, running back out of Florida to the Texans. He's very good in the pass game, whether that's as a receiver or more so as a blocker. He's an unbelievable pass protector, so I imagine that'll certainly make Davis Mills quite happy. And then Nick Benito, edge rusher out of Oklahoma to the Broncos. So my strategy here with Denver was to go for raw players with upside because the Broncos don't really have many holes on their roster. So that's what I did with Channing Tindall, Daniel Falele, and now Nick Benito. All three of them are raw, but all three of them have sky-high ceilings. And if one of those three turns into a star, then that'd be a good draft class for them when it's all said and done. Hopefully, even more than one turns into a really good player for them. Now we get to our final 9 picks of the day. All 9 of these are compensatory selections, starting with the Detroit Lions at 97. We go with Cade Otton, the tight end out of Washington. The Lions do have TJ Hawkinson, who is very good. He's also on the last year of his contract, but I don't think this pick really hurts Hawkinson's value for the future. I don't think Cade Otton has the ceiling to be a number 1 tight end, but he's going to be a really good number 2. Somebody who's a very good blocker, not necessarily a dynamic athlete or receiver, but this can open a lot of things up for the Lions. It can give them opportunities to go with 2 tight end sets. I think Hawkinson and Otton could be a really good duo. Brian Asamoah, linebacker out of Oklahoma to the Saints. I think they could look to add to the linebacking core. Demario Davis isn't getting any younger. They did draft Pete Warner last year, who was pretty solid, but I think they could look to add another one. JoJo Domann, linebacker out of Nebraska, to the Cleveland Browns, another team who could use some additions to the linebacking room, and I think Domann could be pretty solid. Caleb Evans, cornerback out of Missouri, to the Ravens. The Ravens cornerback room was completely depleted last year. Everybody got injured, so I think depth at corner is going to be pretty important. Kingsley Enagbare, edge rusher out of South Carolina, to Cleveland here at 101. This is probably a lot later than he ends up for some people. I think Enagbare's sort of stock is probably a little bit higher around the media than it will end up being around the league. But Enagbare could be very solid, and Cleveland has certainly improved their front four today, adding Enagbare, JoJo Domann, the linebacker, and Travis Jones. Donovan West, center out of Arizona State, to the Dolphins. They need center really badly. Pretty simple. Zach Tom, offensive tackle out of Wake Forest, to the Kansas City Chiefs. I think he could go earlier than people expect, and the Chiefs could look to add some depth there at tackle. Ed Ingram, guard out of LSU, to the Los Angeles Rams. Believe it or not, the Rams do have picks in this year's draft class. I believe this is the compensatory pick for Brad Holmes getting hired by the Lions as our GM, because Holmes is a minority. Most of these picks are because of minority hires, and then the first couple of compensatory picks are because of big-time free agents leaving. I know the Lions' compensatory pick is from Kenny Golladay. And then the last pick of the day at 105, the Niners adding another piece to the secondary with Kirby Joseph out of Illinois, who had a great season for them last year. Sort of an under-the-radar player, but I think he's quite solid. And the Niners are certainly looking to rebuild that young and, I think, in my opinion, underrated secondary, because they have a lot of young guys who are sort of under the radar who could be quite good. So that's going to end today's mock draft. 3 rounds with trades. Let me know what you thought of it down below in the comments. Plenty of draft content here coming within the next 2 weeks. I have my 7-round mock draft coming up. I'm going to have a what I would do mock draft. I'm going to have my big board for every position. I'm not sure how many players I'm going to go up to this year. I think last year I want to say my top like 250 players. I think I went up to 250 last year. Usually I go up each year. I don't know if I'm going to go higher than 250 this year. We'll see. But yeah, that'll wrap up the video. Make sure to like and subscribe. Peace out.